Assalamu alaikum. Another neuroanatomy lecture and discussion of the cranial nerve. The topic of discussion is accessory nerve, which is the 11th cranial nerve. By the end of this lecture, you will know about the nuclei, course, and branches of the accessory nerve and its applied anatomy too. The accessory nerve is a motor nerve and it is attached to the brainstem at the level of medulla. Here you can see it is motor nerve and it has two parts, or you can say it has two roots, cranial and spinal root. Firstly, we come to the cranial root. The cranial root arises from the nucleus ambiguous and it travels towards the jugular foramen. This nucleus receives corticonuclear fibers from both cerebral hemispheres. The efferent fibers of the nucleus emerge from the anterior surface of the medulla above the olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle. These fibers they run laterally in the posterior cranial fossa and join the spinal root. Here you can see this blue one is the nucleus ambiguous and the fibers of the cranial root they are going towards the jugular foramen. Here they join the fibers of the spinal root in the jugular foramen, but just after coming out of the jugular foramen, the both roots separate from one another. The cranial root is distributed to the muscles of the soft palate, pharynx, and the larynx, along with the vagus nerve. It forms plexus there, and there it gives motor supply to the muscles, as well as it also gives sensory supply there. Then we come to the spinal root. The spinal root arises from 1 to 5 segments of the cervical spinal nerves. They travel towards the foramen magnum. From the foramen magnum, they reach the posterior cranial fossa. In the posterior cranial fossa, they travel towards the jugular foramen, where they combine with the cranial root of accessory nerve, and after just passing through the jugular foramen, the both nerve separates. Here you can see this is the cranial root of accessory nerve that arises from this nucleus ambiguous. This is the nucleus ambiguous in pink color, and the cranial root arises from here, and its fibers are distributed after coming out of the jugular foramen with the vagus nerve, while the fibers of the accessory spinal root of accessory nerve they arise from the first 5 segments of the cervical part of the spinal cord. It ascends upwards and enters the cranial cavity through foramen magnum, and then they travel and meet with the cranial root in the jugular foramen, and after passing through the jugular foramen, this spinal root separates from the cranial root and it supplies the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscle. This nerve also gives these two muscles are also supplied by third and fourth spinal nerves, which carry proprioceptive fibers for these muscles. Here you can see the accessory nerve that is coming out of the foramen magnum into the posterior cranial fossa. Then it will travel towards the jugular foramen. The cranial and spinal root separate. The cranial root is distributed through vagus nerve, and the spinal root supply the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid. Here you can see how the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius are supplied. This nerve enters through the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and give external branch to the sternocleidomastoid and passes out of the sternocleidomastoid through its posterior border and enter into the trapezius through its anterior border and supply the trapezius muscle. Here another figure of the accessory nerve as it passes as it comes out of the jugular foramen. Now we come to the lesions of the accessory nerve. As this accessory nerve, it supplies the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the trapezius muscle. So the failure of supply to these muscles result in par- mm, uh, result in accessory nerve palsy, that is that result in muscle wasting of the muscles because the motor supply has been cut down. Here you can see the right side of the patient is without supply. The muscle tone, muscle strength is less, and there is a weakness of the muscle of one side. By this we come to the end of the accessory nerve. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Allah Hafiz.